thank you everyone for coming today to our session, The Role of Corporate Social Responsibility Today and Moving Forward. My name is Anne Padberg. I'm the moderator today, and I have the honor to have fantastic guests with me here on stage who are going to talk about their approaches to corporate social responsibility in the lottery world today and moving forward. I have with me Mariana from Loteria Buenos Aires. I've got Alison Gardner from Camelot UK, and I've got Abhishek from Skillrock Technologies. So we have a very different perspectives on today on corporate social responsibility, which I'm very excited to hear about. First, I'm going to give you a few pointers. Just so you know who I am, that I'm talking about corporate social responsibility in front of you today, is I'm the chair of the WLA Independent Assessment Panel. And in that capacity, I'm seeing a lot of submissions from lotteries around the world on corporate social responsibility, and in particular on responsible gaming. And at the same time, I'm also working with lotteries and other businesses around the world on sustainability and corporate social responsibility. So I thought I would talk to you a bit about a few trends I'm seeing in the world of corporate social responsibility. And let me start with a very unique and a very united approach, which are the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are basically 17 different goals on how the world can become more sustainable and can actually face the challenges that we as people and humanity face on this planet. And there are 17 goals that are focusing on economic, environmental, and social factors. And the important thing why I'm talking about Sustainable Development Goals here today is that there is a huge business opportunity for companies that are moving towards achieving and contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. There's been studies that have been looking at what kind of market opportunities are behind them. So there's 12 trillion US dollars of market opportunities if you as an organization or as a company try to answer the future challenges we as humankind are facing. So I would be really interested to hear a bit more about Sustainable Development Goals and how the lottery sector is in particular tackling those. The second one I want to talk to you about is being socially responsible makes actually business sense. There's a lot of people who are looking at what kind of value do shareholders get. And shareholders, in recent surveys, more and more I look at the integration of non-financial information in annual reports, and they're really looking at sustainability strategies. So how is long-term value created for an organization? So 88% of shareholders in a recent survey have said that actually they see that companies that have a robust practice on sustainability operate better and are more solid. And 81% of CEOs believe that their company's reputation for sustainability is important for consumers' choices. And I think listening to what we've heard this morning, there's certainly a correlation between what future consumers want and what CEOs believe is important in order to attract future consumerism. 75% of people believe that companies can take specific actions to increase profits and improve economic performance where they operate. And I think we as the lottery sector, or the lottery sector in general, can certainly demonstrate that that's already been the case for many, many years. I want to pick up on something which we've also heard about this morning, and that's generational shifts. And we can see them happening. This is a graph where you can actually see that for millennials on the left-hand side, the social and economic issues are increasingly important for them, especially for the younger people. And Jeff Fromm was talking about Generation Z this morning, so that's an even bigger step moving forward. We haven't included that graph on here yet. And coming back to millennials once more, they want their employer to be responsible at the same time. And there are certain statistics, I'll just pick out one. 82% of millennials say that it's important for their companies to promote health and wellness for consumers and employees in their investment portfolio. So there's a lot of things in there, in particular in younger people's mind, with regards to how a company should behave and how socially responsible it should be. Now let me briefly link this to another topic, which is responsible gaming. I have the pleasure of working on the WLA independent panel with Bob Ladouceur, who's an absolute distinguished researcher and clinical academic on treatment and actually prevention with regards to social responsibility practices and responsible gaming. And Bob and a few colleagues of his came up with the Reno model. And the Reno model basically says, an organization, when it works on responsible gaming, should focus on the majority of players. There are always going to be a number of players that have issues with gaming. But prevention strategies within lotteries or other gambling operations should be focusing on the majority of players, on those players that just want to enjoy the games that you are all producing. And I think that's a very important first step and framework to look at, that prevention should actually work so that people enjoy the games and at the same time have the right tools and the right measures and opportunities to protect themselves should they feel they need to. And a few of the trends that I have been seeing in the last couple of years, in particular on responsible gaming, have been the use of data analytics, technology improvements, digitization, collecting data, being able to analyze it, being able to use it for prediction, and really understanding where someone's developing. Where is this player we are looking at? Is it a player which is on the green side, on the low-risk side, or is it a player that might actually move into the problem play side? So that's an important part of it. And the other thing which we are now seeing with lotteries is they are moving much more into intervention. Intervention that players are not even going to move into problem play, but that they're staying at an earlier place and they are calling them and they say, actually, have you an idea how much you've played over the last few weeks? And so they are trying to intervene so that players do not even move into a high-risk play area, because they believe if they do that, the player is going to stay with them, because the trust in the organization is increasing for the player and therefore the trust in that lottery operation. Retailer programs, game design are incredibly important elements, especially in the terrestrial side or on the side of preventing any issues with games right when you start thinking about them. And lastly, and I think that's the most important part here, it's about strategic integration. Being able to really understand that a sound socially responsible program and a sound responsible gaming program needs to be strategically incorporated into all the commercial decision making. And we see this increasingly coming up with lotteries. So that's a brief one on trends in responsible gaming. And finally, I just want to make one statement, and I hope my fantastic speakers, which are coming afterwards, are going to confirm that. And actually, being socially responsible is an advantage, because it gives you a competitive advantage. You understand your player, you understand where you're going to. It benefits your image, it benefits your reputation. If you are, looking at future regulatory challenges, it might be actually really important to meet those, and you can only do that when you know who's playing with you and how are they playing. And it helps you therefore grow performance, and it helps addressing growing demands, because when you do that, you have a fantastic opportunity to understand what kind of market opportunities are out there and how can you address them and meet them. So this was just a few pointers. And now you will hear from the real lottery world. And I'm very pleased to introduce Mariana. I would like you to come on stage, Mariana, and talk about your approach. If you there is a translation from Spanish to English. So in case you do not have headphones yet, then I would suggest you take them. So, Mariana, please go ahead. Thank you.
Hola, muy buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por estar aquí hoy. Intentaré hablar bastante pausado para que puedan tener tiempo de hacer la traducción. Les voy a pedir un favor muy especial, que me tengan paciencia. Esto es nuevo para mí de hablar en público, así que puede ser que me tiemble la voz, se me aflojen las piernas o como meta algún furcio. Como buena geminiana, me costó bastante decidir cómo iba a comenzar esta presentación, de qué les iba a hablar hoy. Por suerte, hace un par de semanas tuvimos una call con Anne, ella no lo sabe, pero sus palabras me ayudaron bastante a tomar una decisión. Y por eso hoy quiero comenzar la presentación mostrándoles lo siguiente. ¿Qué es esto? Esto que ustedes ven en pantalla y que yo tengo aquí. Para los que sonríen, no es el número ganador del loto. Vamos a tener que seguir trabajando varios años más. Pero sí es el número ganador de juego responsable. ¿Y por qué digo el número ganador? Porque en esta hora en la que vamos a estar aquí conversando sobre juego responsable, el mensaje que contiene la línea de atención 0800 va a generar 93.000 impactos. Esto, estoy convencida, es el camino del juego responsable hacia el futuro. Y si me lo permiten, hoy en estos minutos quiero contarles de qué se trata nuestro programa. El programa de juego responsable de Lotería de la Ciudad tiene 4 ejes fundamentales relacionados entre ellos, impensables uno sin el otro. Esos ejes tienen que ver con la sensibilización, la promoción y prevención del juego responsable, la investigación y la orientación y la asistencia. Cuando comenzamos a pensar en este programa, cuáles iban a ser nuestras estrategias, sabíamos que necesitábamos tener una foto del juego de la ciudad y saber dónde estábamos parados. Por eso realizamos un estudio a través de una consultora y los datos obtenidos fueron los siguientes. Sabíamos que el 0,9 tenía problemas con el juego y el 1,8 era jugador patológico. Esto era sobre el 22% de la población que jugaba. Hoy también sabemos que 6 de cada 7 son mujeres y que 7 de cada 10 se encuentran en un rango de edad que va entre los 51 y 80 años. Toda esta información nos permitió tener y tomar decisiones sobre cuáles iban a ser nuestras estrategias de comunicación, cuál iba a ser nuestro mensaje. Durante este año y medio de gestión que llevamos, realizamos diferentes campañas en vía pública, implementamos la leyenda en los tickets de apuestas, de todas las apuestas de los juegos que se comercializan en las agencias oficiales de Lotería de la Ciudad. Generamos folletería, la cual también distribuimos, y quisimos llevar la propuesta de la leyenda también a los operadores, y hoy tenemos la leyenda incluida en todos los tickets de los slots, que es lo que ustedes ven en las imágenes. Pero no conformes con esto, sabíamos que queríamos generar un impacto, queríamos hablarle a los jugadores, queríamos meternos en su ambiente y decidimos llevar una campaña a las salas de juego. Estas fotos que ustedes ven atrás mío son imágenes de la campaña hoy implementada en las salas de Hipódromo Argentino de Palermo y en lo que espero vaya este mes, también esté en Casino Buenos Aires. El mensaje de esta campaña era muy simple. Queríamos dar a conocer señales para que aquellas personas que estuviesen padeciendo la enfermedad pudieran darse cuenta. Y las que así fueran tuvieran un número donde pudieran conseguir ayuda, orientación y asistencia. Para los que les voy a contar un poco qué es lo que decían los mensajes. Por ejemplo, uno de ellos decía: si pasaste demasiado tiempo jugando, la salida es por acá. Jugamos un poco con las salidas de emergencia, que son conocidas por todos y reconocidas como señales verdes que indican la salida. Y esta salida hacía referencia al 0800, esto que les conté antes. Brindarles un apoyo, una ayuda a aquellos que tuviesen un problema. Sabemos que la comunicación es muy efectiva, pero también lo son las acciones directas en la comunidad. Y por eso realizamos activaciones en la comunidad. Estas activaciones y acciones no serían posibles y no serían verdaderas políticas públicas si no fuera en conjunto con otros organismos públicos. Por eso, en lo que va de nuestra gestión, hemos firmado ya 5 convenios con ministerios como el Ministerio de Salud, el Ministerio de Desarrollo Humano, con secretarías como la Secretaría de Inclusión Social para Adultos Mayores, ANSES, PAMI, otros organismos estatales. Estos convenios nos permitieron diseñar acciones específicas orientadas a grupos vulnerables, como los adultos mayores. Para ellos realizamos talleres, participamos en los centros de jubilados, los centros de día. Nos sumamos a una propuesta muy interesante que se llama Tercera en la Calle, que trabaja con los adultos en las plazas de la ciudad. Ahí llevamos nuestros talleres, nuestro mensaje. Y cuando hacemos estos talleres, siempre tratamos de dejar un mensaje que le permita a la gente obtener herramientas para jugar de manera responsable. Uno de mis preferidos es aquella frase que dice que hay que equilibrar el juego con otras actividades. Pero esta frase estaría incompleta si no la acompañáramos con una herramienta concreta. Y acá viene un poco la vedette del juego responsable, que es un juego de mesa llamado El Mercado, que yo traje hoy aquí para mostrárselos. Este juego fue diseñado especialmente para lotería y funciona un poco de agente multiplicador del mensaje de juego responsable, porque a través de él permite adquirir hábitos, beneficios y también comparte los valores de la ciudad. Traje un par de juegos, no se los voy a vender, se los voy a regalar para aquellos que estén interesados y quieran conocer un poco más de lo que se trata. Por último, ya llegando casi al final de esta presentación, quiero contarles sobre nuestra línea de atención, que hoy nombré ya varias veces. Es una línea gratuita que funciona en Lotería de la Ciudad, que es atendida por profesionales de la salud mental, psicólogos. Y esta línea tiene un servicio muy especial que permite derivar en el acto a 5 centros de tratamientos ubicados en la Ciudad de Buenos Aires, a aquellas personas que tengan problemas con el juego. Otra herramienta, hablando de tratamiento y que acompaña el tratamiento, sabemos es la autoexclusión. Cuando asumimos este compromiso, existían varios programas de autoexclusión vigentes y teníamos la fuerte convicción de que debíamos mejorar esto para que realmente fuera una herramienta eficaz para aquellas personas que decían voluntariamente excluirse de las salas de juego. Entonces, generamos un registro único en la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. Hoy tenemos ese registro online con los operadores que permite ver en tiempo real las actas de autoexclusión, levantamiento y detección. Eso nos permite saber que tenemos más de 1.700 autoexclusiones vigentes, que el 80% de los autoexcluidos son hombres y el 56% va en un rango de entre los 30 y los 49 años, perdón. Todos estos datos retroalimentan constantemente nuestro programa y nos van marcando el camino. que fue un poco lo que abrí contándoles hoy. Creemos que el juego es un entretenimiento y pensamos entonces cuánto más sustentable sería la industria si lográramos garantizar la protección de los más vulnerables. El trabajo es difícil, pero no es imposible. Podemos hacerlo y creo que estamos trabajando en ello. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you.
Sorry.
We will have a question and answer session after the presentations have been given. So I would like Alison Gardner now from Camelot to get on stage.
Hi everyone, as Anne said, thank you. I'm Alison Gardner from Camelot UK. I'm head of corporate responsibility there. It's also worth saying that I chair the WLA Responsible Gaming Working Group and also the European Lotteries Corporate Social Responsibility and Responsible Gaming Working Group. So I've been working with Anne on the WLA Responsible Gaming certification, and I think we're hosting a Q&A in the next couple of days as well, so if you have any questions about certification, then we're your ladies for that. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about Camelot's corporate responsibility programme, but particularly focusing on responsible gaming. And I think it's worth just giving a quick introduction to Camelot as an operator. We've been operating the UK National Lottery since 1994, so we've been through 3 licence competitions, and you'll have heard that there's a 4th one coming up in 2023. We derive about 25% of our sales from our digital channels, and about 75% from retail, and that totals about £7 billion a year. We have a portfolio of draw games, scratch cards and online instant win games, and we return around £1.5 billion a year to good causes. We have about 45,000 retailers across the UK. We don't own our retail estate, they're third-party providers, and they range from small independent corner shops through to large supermarkets that have our terminals. And we have about 11 million registered digital players. So it's quite a large operation. Corporate responsibility is quite a significant part of our social licence to operate. As an operator of a national lottery, which has a government-sanctioned monopoly, we're continually having to reapply, if you like, for our social licence to operate, permission from our various stakeholders to operate. And we do that through operating responsibly. Responsible business is integral to the way that we do business in a way that's actually quite implicit rather than explicit often. But one of the activities that we do in order to reassess our corporate responsibility strategy periodically is a materiality matrix exercise. We last did this 2 years ago, where we map out stakeholder priorities, what's important to the people that matter, versus our own commercial priorities and the impact that those initiatives would have on us commercially. And by carrying out this matrix exercise, you then get into a very good way of prioritizing what your corporate responsibility issues are. And for us, player protection is obviously our #1 priority, and it always has been. But there are 3 other areas that we put particular focus on. Our people, obviously, are the key to us being a successful organisation, and things like workplace diversity, well-being are incredibly important to making sure we're a successful organisation. Obviously, our supply chain, we have a network of about 800 suppliers, making sure that they are paid on time, that corporate responsibility is incorporated into the way we do business with those suppliers is incredibly important. And also, obviously, our environmental impact is something that has become quite a hygiene factor for a number of businesses, but is quite easily forgotten when you're busy doing other things. So that's all I'm going to say about corporate responsibility for now, and I'm going to go on to talk about responsible gaming in more detail. It is just worth noting, though, that the European Lotteries Responsible Gaming and CSR Working Group have been doing quite a lot of work on incorporating the Sustainable Development Goals into some CSR guidelines specifically tailored for lotteries. They're coming soon, they're not finished yet, but just so you know that that work is ongoing. And so as a lottery operator, if you're thinking about how to incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals and corporate social responsibility more widely into your work, then it's worth looking at those guidelines when they become available next year. So our approach to player protection is, obviously, as a steward of a national asset, we have a huge amount of responsibility to make sure that we are operating with players' interests at our heart. And we have an ambition to be the safest place to pay, to play, to win. So we want to prevent underage and excessive play, but also more broadly to promote safe and healthy play for all players. We encourage mass participation, so getting a lot of players to play a little bit. And a good example of how we do that is around the fact that we are 6th in terms of sales in the world as a lottery, but just 65th in spend per capita, and that's according to Lafleur's this year. So we are, our average spend on draw-based games is around about £4 a week, which is very small when you consider the size of our lottery, but our uniqueness comes from our scale. And player protection is embedded into the way that we do business and into our governance framework. So, for example, we have a cross-functional working group internally, which features many of our directors from different parts of the business, where we talk about player protection specifically and how to integrate those activities more broadly into our business operations. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the player protection world has evolved for us. And I think, given that we've been operating the National Lottery since 1994, we have quite a long track record of incorporating player interests into what we do. It starts really with a really high bar for doing the basics really, really well. At the time when we developed some of these initiatives, they were quite innovative and quite groundbreaking, but have become now the foundation for a lot of other lotteries. These focus on game design and product safety, so making sure we put decent games into market in the first place means that you have far fewer issues to deal with at the other end when it comes to problem gambling. I'm going to talk about this in more detail later, but just to cover off the other parts. We've then moved on, our programme has evolved to talk about much more about preventing harm in specific channels. So looking at how we use analytics in our digital platform, and then also how we execute responsible gaming really, really well in our retail channel. And then finally, as I alluded to earlier on, looking more broadly at safer play for all of our players, making sure we're promoting the National Lottery as being a safe place to come and play and spend your money. One of the ways to do that is to leverage our scale. As I said before, we have 45,000 retailers across the United Kingdom, so that's a huge kind of shop window for responsible play. But then also, going quite granular, our digital platform is evolving to the point where we're able to target specific players and serve very personalized content to players that we want to communicate with. So I'll come on in a little bit more detail about analytics in a minute. So going back to the beginning, talking about setting a high bar, we were involved in developing GamGuard, which is now widely used by a number of other lotteries in collaboration with other academics. We developed that back in 2006. And that's a really good first step in risk assessing the games that you put into market. As I said, we want to put decent games into market that we think don't have underage appeal, that aren't high risk, that don't appeal to problem gamblers. And then that, as a result, means that people can feel confident playing our games, that they're not risky games. Around preventing underage play, we've had a mystery shopping program running for over 10 years, where we send young people aged over 16 into our retail estate to test whether retailers are correctly asking for ID. We do 11,600 visits a year, and we have a pass rate of 91%, which is very sort of good when compared to other categories like alcohol and cigarette sales, and also with other lotteries. Online also, we have very rigorous background checks using Experian data, a credit reference agency. And then finally, as I said before, we've always been involved in setting standards for others. So we work with the European Lotteries and the WLA on the working groups and developing, we were involved in developing the responsible gaming certification, and we were awarded the best responsible gaming program in 2014. So then building on that capability to try and identify and reduce harm and offer safe channels. In a retail environment, we've obviously continued to evolve Operation Child, which is our mystery shopping program. But also more recently, we've been working with RG Plus, the Canadian consultancy, on developing better retailer training around excessive play. It's actually a really difficult thing to do in our retail estate, given that we don't own our estate. The people that run those retailers are not employed directly by us, so from a training perspective, it's quite difficult to influence how they sell our products and how they act towards our customers. So we've been developing a set of guidelines for retailers, very simple, very clear guidelines for them to follow if they encounter what they consider to be problem play in their estate, and then what to do for that player to help that player. So we're developing that work at the moment with RG Plus, and we're rolling out that training in the early new year. And we're taking this test and learn approach. So we've did some pilot work last year on this retailer training, and we want to continually test new things, evaluate whether they work or not, learn from what we've done, and then embed the learnings into a more developed program. On a digital front, we obviously have very low default spend and play limits, and £350 a week is our spend limit. We also have lots of tools for players to use to manage their play, and we have engaging content for them to look at online to signpost them to where they can seek help if they need it. And we've been working on behaviour analytics, as Anne talked about, since 2014. And we use a machine learning algorithm to identify problem play behaviours in our digital platform. So the algorithm monitors players across a given set of play behaviours, and then gives them a score based on how many of those behaviours they are exhibiting. And then we can classify players into red, amber and green cohorts. So high risk being the red ones. And then we can send them targeted and escalating interventions that are based on behavioural science, so around nudge theory, to try and change that player's behaviour. And then finally, talking about being more integrated and more granular, more personalised, we want to make sure that player protection is visible in every single step of the player journey, from when they join us, when they first play and buy their ticket, through to winning, through to seeking help, through to re-engaging with us if they lapse for a while, and so on, so that player protection is woven into that player journey. And then, as I said before, giving that personalised behavioural feedback and making sure that players see relevant content for them if it's around player protection, if we're concerned about their play. And then finally, that scale I was talking about, promoting the safer play message through player-facing communications. And we have a massive opportunity to reach a significant number of the UK's problem gamblers. We know that about 98% of them play the National Lottery, even if actually the games that they have difficulty with are not ours. And so we know that we have a huge opportunity to speak to those players and signpost them towards getting help. So if you have any questions, please get in touch. And as I say, Anne and I will be around tomorrow to talk more about certification. Okay?
Thank you, Alison. I'm now pleased to ask Abhishek to give his presentation, because I'm very pleased that we also have a vendor's perspective on this panel. So please, Abhishek,
thank you.
Go ahead.
So thanks a lot, Anne, for the opportunity. As you can see that I'm odd man out over here, right? Sounds like ladies are more responsible than the men. But on the other hand, these guys are actually hands-on onto the corporate social responsibility execution, whereby I come from a technology background. So that's, again, sets me a little different perspective. So what I'll do is that if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs 2020-30, and implementation of the same onto CSR initiatives, and which reflects back to the responsible gaming. That's where I'm going to talk about, especially from the responsible gaming implementation perspective, right? And the approach is to move from being reactive to being proactive, right? So let's look at just a quick introduction about SkillRock. SkillRock has been a technology vendor. We are a gold member of WLA and being part of various regional associations. We have been providing our technology solutions to 22 odd jurisdictions, over 120,000 retail touch points across the globe, and almost 20 million plus transactions are happening on our platform various places. In addition to that, SkillRock is a part of Sugal and Damani Group, which is the largest lottery operator of India, operating lotteries for more than 45 years plus, right? Moving on. If you look at the reactive approach versus the proactive approach, the core theme of my thought here is that if you look at years ago, the responsible gaming implementation used to be to support players if they come to the lottery operator saying that I'm having a problem, right? The players used to approach to the lotteries, and it was more of an advisory and support. On the other hand, the next stage, which was primarily driven by the iGaming or iLottery operations, was an active mode of operation whereby the operator used to put limits, the player used to give their limits, and there were certain hardwired controls which were available into the systems. However, now, at this stage of technology advancement, there is a need of being proactive, being preventive for your players, right? And how do you do that? It's very simply that collect the raw data as much as possible, right? Collecting that raw data, taking information out of that raw data, making pattern analytics on your data, and finding conclusions and preventions for players to act upon, right? That's the proactive approach we are talking about. If you look at, oops, my mistake, right? So if you look at the responsible gaming implementation, we have to see it from a complete 3C perspective, which is we have to ensure that our responsible gaming implementation is across the content. That means either it's for draw games, it's for sports, it's for instant win games. It has to be context across the context. That means it has to go from a global context to a player individualistic context, as well as it has to apply on all the channels, right? Which is a retail channel, iGaming channel, or a self-service channel. Now, if you look at that, I'll just skip this one and move down here. When I say channel, the interesting thing is that retail channel is the most overlooked from a responsible gaming perspective, right? Though it still contributes the maximum share of sales, the responsible gaming implementation on retail channel is primarily driven by retail training. As Alison said, that in case of a UK National Lottery, the stores are not owned by them, right? Those are shop-in-shop environments, right? Had you been or had one operator being in a dedicated shop, you can still use fancy technologies like video analytics, etc., for underage play. However, when it comes down to a shop-in-shop environment, those challenges are much more, right? In addition to that, if you look at the way some lotteries have implemented is based on a player card, right? A player card being issued against a national ID, against your age proof for across all the channels, right? And last but not least, this becomes more challenging when it comes down to emerging markets. When it comes down to the emerging markets, there are challenges like you may or may not have access to the KYC norms of a national ID in a real time. Those are the next level of challenges what you see over there. So in that case, we have to see what are the possible alternatives of such player card issuance. Next by that is personalized content. And when we go about personalized context, we are talking about personalized context to ensure that the individuals are reached for preventive action, right? One of them is global player card, as I said earlier, that a player card to be issued against a national ID, whereby a age connection or his identity can be mapped. The next is personalized control, because the responsible gaming, what is it for me, versus the responsible gaming, what is for you, can be really different, right? So you have to see it from various personal context basis, and my personal favorites are the two ones, which is age as well as the income group, right? Because for a person of different income group, responsible gaming controls can be different, right? So, but it all depends on the kind of data you collect at the time of player onboarding or player card issuance, right? The next one is caring for millennials and the Generation Z, which we were talking about in the morning, because if you look at that particular player segment, that player segment has an urge to win, right? They want to chase for their loss. They want to interact more. They want to engage more with the game. So that's a different set of engagement would be required. If you look at proactive actions, the first thing required is the behavioral pattern identification, right? Which would be player-centric, which would be game-centric. If we talk about player-centric, we will need to see the player demographics. We will need to see what timings, what the days, what are the dates on which player is playing, what are the typical session lengths, what the player have, what are the breaks a player is taking between multiple gameplays. That's a behavioral pattern analytics which we are talking about. Followed by that, we have to talk about targeted interventions as well, whereby we are talking about that if the player is almost playing regularly near to the RG limits, right? What is player's behavior when he's continuously losing the games, or what happens if he has won large winnings? What are the patterns? What is the behavioral tactics over there? In addition to that, we are also talking about early interventions, whereby we have to see how exactly especially the iGaming side of it, how exactly the various engines, which are very common into typical e-commerce, have to behave differently. For example, if we talk about a recommendation engine of a product on an e-commerce site, those are intended to showcase a product which a player is most likely to buy or has bought probably frequent buying. Whereas on the other hand, if we influence the recommendation engine through our responsible gaming framework, then in that case, it has to see that what are the chances of a player being addicted to that game, right? Followed by that, on the same line, we have also to see that there are a lot of comeback promotions on an e-commerce engine, right? So we have to see how exactly that has to be influenced by a responsible gaming framework. And in addition to that, we have also to analyze various addictive games, right? Moving on. So in continuation of that, we as a SkillRock has offered recently launched a newer gaming platform, which is called Infinity Limitless Gaming. And we are getting our platform ready from data feed across the channels, across the content, across the context. We are talking about highly customizable gaming limits because the platform has to go to multiple jurisdictions, ranging from a small operator to a large-scale operators, behavioral pattern recognition and actions thereof, and most importantly, it has to be pluggable with a third-party platform as well. That's the base of that's the base of the whole new gaming platform. I look forward to see you at our stand to see that, and thanks from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhishek. I would now like to open the floor to questions. We have some very nice volunteers that are running around with microphones in their hands. So if there is a question from the audience, can you please raise your hand? Yeah, the lady here in front.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm from Lottery West. I'm Susan Hunt in Australia. I'm just querying, I had a question for Alison around retailers, and you talked about bringing them on the journey of responsible gambling. Did you need to incentivise retailers, or did you use a more punitive licensing approach?
So when it comes to responsible gaming and prevention of excessive play, we haven't incentivised or punished retailers at all. We've just really appealed to their nature around doing the right thing. And actually, the feedback we've had from them is actually very good. That they feel grateful that we've given them some pointers about how to deal with any incidents of problem play that they see in their store. We haven't asked them to be particularly proactive in identifying or taking a specific action. So in that sense, we can't really incentivize a specific action. Whereas with our underage mystery shopping program, there's a very clear, you need to ask for ID, have you done it, yes or no, type test that you can check. We haven't got there with excessive play in retail yet, but perhaps in the future we might consider a specific call to action that is that we can test and do some mystery shopping around that, but we're not there at the moment.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Further questions from the audience? I've got one, which I'd like to ask the entire panel. We've been hearing a lot about millennials this morning and about the change in trust and expectation to an organization. How do you think that's going to impact on lottery business in general? I would like to start actually with Abhishek.
So if you look at the millennials and the Generation Z, if we talk about, the most important thing is that their gaming pattern is completely different, right? We have seen a lot of lotteries introducing games which are highly involved games, which are probably skill involvement games as well. Those kind of games are rather going to attract more millennials. On the other hand, they're also going to attract problems on the responsible gaming side. If there is a game which needs my skill involvement, I would be more excited to ensure that can I lose that game. So I'll be more engaged continuously if I'm losing in that game. So the loss correction is something which would be more on that front. In addition to that, there would be newer devices and the newer channels which would emerge with these millennials to go, actually. So that's the major perspective from my side.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Mariana, do you have an idea about millennials and how they are going to change the way they work or that they actually buy your products?
Yes, I think I will answer in English, so or can do it in Spanish as well. Creo que es un desafío para nosotros y debemos pensar nuevas estrategias para abordar a los millennials y también para lograr su protección. Sabemos hoy que la adicción a las nuevas tecnologías es una enfermedad y también es necesario contar con herramientas, ya sea tecnológicas o de otra calidad para asegurar su bienestar y también lograr una imagen más sustentable de la industria.
Gracias.
I would offer a couple of perspectives. The first, that I think millennials have become so attuned now to the way that they shop and the way that they interact with companies is they expect personalization. They expect content to be served direct to them, that is tailored to them, that someone somewhere, an algorithm has designed for them. And I think that really is what's leading us down this personalized route, because we know that that's what people expect, and that's what actually has a really positive impact on play behavior. But also more broadly, from a corporate responsibility perspective, millennials are savvy and they can spot a mile off companies that aren't genuine. And I think that's a good kind of yardstick for operators is, does this feel like it's being forced? Does this feel like it's not genuine? Because millennials in particular will spot it and will act with their feet.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I was wondering, when we've been hearing about the difference between digital channels and retail, and looking at data analytics and predictive analytics, how is that going to, in your opinion, how's that going to evolve? I mean, you, Abhishek, gave us already a few ideas about new platforms and things like that. Do you think that's an area which, in a way, is going to evolve and basically increase trust of players? Or do you think it might actually, given that we've got so many issues around data protection and data privacy these days, it might lead, you know, also to some more instances where people are worried about the data that is going to be analyzed? I would like to start with you.
Okay, so certainly if you look at recent implementations of GDPR, that would bring in concerns about data privacy and the amount of data you track or you store, right? Those kind of concerns are going to be there. However, the important thing is that first, whether once you store that data and act upon that data, can you convert them to be anonymous data in terms of player segmentation, player profile being created, right? That's one set of action probably would be required. However, as I did state in my presentation as well, in my perspective, the retail channel is primarily the most ignored channel from a responsible gaming perspective, because the technology that could reach to that space as well has not yet reached there, right? So we have to see how can we still track the player's activity omni-channel. That's where the next step should be.
Okay. I'll go with this. So Alison.
I think when it comes to retail, it's a really difficult challenge, but there are certain things that we've got in the pipeline that we think might be able to help us with identifying players in a retail channel better. So using their app, for example, in-store to interact with the product in a way that gives us more of more data about that player, and so we can start to build up more of a picture. But I think in our existing digital channels, to date, the analytics work we've been doing has been behind the scenes. So the player doesn't necessarily know that's what we're doing. And I think, as you say, with increased concerns about data privacy and also from an effectiveness point of view, I think it makes more sense to surface that and be much more explicit to the player, to tell them that we have this capability and encourage them to engage with it. And that's where the surfacing of personalized content really helps. So giving that player very specific feedback about their play behavior is certainly, we've seen a couple of examples of operators who are doing a really good job of that. And I think that's the direction of travel for us.
Siempre y cuando los mensajes o las herramientas que utilicemos no sean invasivas para los clientes, creo que es el camino hacia el futuro y que los clientes se van a sentir más cuidados y eso va a beneficiar indudablemente a la industria.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. There's a question over there.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, particularly with the operators on the panel, as to what the relationship is that you have with your regulators. Are there requirements that they have of you? Are you largely self-regulated in terms of the responsible gambling space in your particular jurisdictions, but also in the WLA context, as to whether there's there are differences or there are different approaches that regulators have to you in the WLA in the responsible gambling space.
Alison, do you want to know?
Yeah, so we're regulated by the UK Gambling Commission, and within the UK Gambling Commission there is a separate National Lottery team who are responsible for working with us day to day. And actually the terms of our license aren't very prescriptive when it comes to corporate responsibility and responsible gaming, whereas the broader gambling sector in the UK does have a sort of a code of practice as such, which is much more prescriptive. So in that sense, we have more freedom to innovate within that framework. And so we work with our regulator. We have an ongoing dialogue with them where we share our strategy and we share the outputs of that strategy. And we sort of work quite closely with them to share what we do and to get their feedback, rather than it being sort of very prescriptive and a specific set of requirements that they require of us. So we've developed that relationship since we first took the license over 20 years ago. So it's slightly different for us versus other UK gambling operators.
Thank you. Mariana?
La Lotería de la Ciudad tiene a cargo el control y la regulación del juego en la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. Nosotros trabajamos con los operadores, tratamos de transmitirles los valores de la WLA, trabajamos bajo sus estándares e intentamos que ellos también los establezcan para sus programas de juego responsable. Y desde nuestro lugar fiscalizamos y controlamos que eso suceda.
Okay, well, unfortunately our time is up. I would have had thousands of more questions, but maybe you guys are free that you can escape them. Alison, Abhishek and Mariana will be around for the rest of the conference as far as I understood, and they will be very glad to answer any questions you might have.